You're listening to the Digital Data Café podcast, where we talk about everything data-driven in your world. Join us each week to hear from the world's top business and industry leaders on why using data in a digital world matters. Here's your host, Albert Thompson.
Good afternoon. This is another exciting episode of the Digital Data Cafe. I'm your host, Albert Thompson, and I am so fortunate today to have Rebecca Kacaba, CEO and co-founder of DealMaker. Rebecca, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, Albert. Excited to be here.
No, super excited. And I know, boy, we've been trying to get this on the calendar for quite some time. But being super busy and with the explosive growth of DealMaker, it's been really hard, but excited to have you. So,
great.
On the last episode, I do recall you were on with a few of our actual clients working with you. And I believe in that podcast, just to kind of give those in the audience who are hearing the opportunity to kind of get some feedback into where we're at today. We had an issuer that actually came on, and they were talking about some of the benefits that DealMaker has provided them in terms of raising capital in the crowdfunding community. And today, I think, we can kind of move forward from that. And I'd like to really focus on you, on DealMaker, the business, your insights, crowdfunding related topics, and really for the startup founders out there that are listening, or those that are thinking of getting funding, right? I would love for them to learn more about DealMaker. So, with that said, I think it'd be great for you to just kind of share your journey, your background, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get started in the business?
Yeah, thanks, Albert. So I was a capital markets attorney for over a decade, doing lots of mergers and acquisitions and IPOs and really hanging around the capital formation space. And I saw the Jobs Act come out, and I was working, always helping a lot of founders, and I saw a lot of pain points in the way they were raising capital. It was really paper-based. It was really cumbersome. And so that was causing a real challenge, and the costs were too high for founders. And so I really wanted to disrupt that. And I saw an opportunity to bring down the cost of capital and to leverage some of the new regulations that were coming out that were allowing really more access to capital for everyday Americans. I saw that as an enormous opportunity, even bigger than practicing law.
That's incredible. And so maybe share a little bit. So from the time where you were seeing that in the capital markets and seeing this opportunity that was a pain point that you capitalized on, I mean, just kind of like from that story of getting started, I mean, what was that moment that you had as that founder to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to just do this? Was there like a moment in time where you just started it and you were ready to go, or, is there a little something you can share there?
Yeah, it was a lot of moments. It was a long transition for me, from inception, and my co-founder and I started really working on the idea of building technology on the side, doing Wednesday evening and Saturday day, days dedicated to the business. And I transitioned law firms, and my book of business exploded. And I had 2 small children, and my husband was doing his MBA. So there was a lot going on, and I really just had to make some choices. And building DealMaker was something I was really passionate about, and I saw an amazing opportunity. And so it was really more a situation of seeing something, being passionate about it, and just never giving up despite all the times you get knocked back when you're a founder and it feels like you're back at square one. You just continue on the road. And at a certain point, I knew we had the technology to a place where it was ready. And I was fortunate to have some clients in those days who were willing to experiment with me on their capital raises. And they really gave me the validation. They saw what I was trying to do. And that gave me the leverage to raise some capital from folks that I knew who were in and around the capital markets as well, doing my own crowdfund of taking small checks from a large number of people who understood what I was trying to do and could help me bring the business forward and make it successful.
What I love about your story in particular is, and the reason why I asked that, right, is because as founders, there's always that kind of that moment where it's like, we either we have to do it, or, we just got to take that chance, right? And just take that step ahead. And what really I think is so interesting is in the way that it really integrates with the concept of DealMaker, right? As a founder, there's always going to be reasons not to do something, but this is really an opportunity, I think, for founders to find that opportunity to really take that next step, to your point, to get the lower cost of capital, to get that next momentum to drive the business forward. I mean, are these some of the things that inspired your founding? I mean, and what unique value do you think that DealMaker brings to the industry today?
To me, it is part of that journey that DealMaker is for the entrepreneur first. That's been my entire career, has been helping other entrepreneurs. I get a lot of gratification out of that, of seeing their ideas, of seeing them become successful. Our whole team does. Like, we love the offerings that are on the system and seeing how these entrepreneurs are changing the world. And that really is what has leveraged into our market position, that love for the entrepreneur, the support of the founder. We know how hard that job is, that job that you yourself, Albert, are doing. We got a ton of respect for that. And that's really why we exist, to make their job easier. And so I think a lot of the other solutions, as it transitions into where we sit in the marketplace, they just aren't that. They aren't totally founder first. They might be there for multiple stakeholders, and there's many different business models, but ours is to put the entrepreneur first.
No, and I completely agree with you. I think that, from a crowdfunding perspective and what you guys are really doing, it does put that founder-friendly, founder-first, approach in place. I know this wasn't kind of in some of the Q&A that we discussed a little earlier, but I think it would be important for those that are listening that maybe don't understand. And a lot of times, I mean, I'll tell you, I've spoken with many small to medium-sized business founders, and they don't even know that this type of funding mechanism is available to them. So would you mind taking kind of like 30 seconds and just high level, what is crowdfunding and what's the difference between crowdfunding and angel investing, and just kind of just the layout of the land for those listening?
Yeah, for sure. I think the way people build a business today in 2023 is very different than it was even 1 year to 2 years ago. And that a lot has to do with the internet, right? It's permeated every corner of people's lives. And the big platforms, the Facebooks, Instagram, Twitter, X, all of these things form an integral part of the communication. And the way that astute founders realize they can leverage those platforms is part of building a community, and building a community that supports their business. And that's what really crowdfunding allows founders to do. If you issue equity to the community around you who are excited about your business, you get 54% more engagement out of them. And once you get that engagement, what are you going to do with it? There's a lot of different ways you can leverage it to build your business. So one of my favorite stories, because it sets the path so clearly, is a company called Miso Robotics, who has raised tens of millions on our system, probably close to 65 million. And they communicate with their community on a regular basis. So they build a robotic arm that works in restaurants to flip burgers. And it's easy to understand the vision of how robotics can change the restaurant industry. And the community around that business is very passionate. And so they reached out to their community and said, look, we need contracts. We need leverage for Flippy, our robot. Out of their community came an introduction that got them a pilot with White Castle. Then last weekend on Saturday Night Live, you've got Saturday Night Live bringing up Flippy and the White Castle contract, and seeing the robotic burger flipper and showcasing it on national television. And that's the power that astute founders can use to leverage a community and build their business in a way that's very scrappy, very intelligent, and really brings value to their shareholders.
Unbelievable. I love that story. Unbelievable story. How amazing. Because when you think about it, right, you're absolutely right. From a crowdfunding perspective, you are not only building, your cap table of, shareholders, but this is your crowd. These are your people. These are people that can help you to leverage opportunities. And this story of the White Castle opportunity can be just one of many opportunities that these founders can leverage now. This community that they're building through equity crowdfunding. This is amazing.
It is. It's really fun. And so I can go into the metrics about, why community raising is more founder first, right? You set your own terms rather than being handed a term sheet by someone else. You're not giving up board seats. There's a lot of really interesting in-depth things like that. But I think what's important, if what I just said speaks to you as a founder, as something that you can leverage, then this is the type of capital raising that you should be exploring. I myself have gotten some amazing introductions on a regular basis over the last 5 or 6 years out of my investor base, including deals on the system, including introductions to some sports teams we're speaking to about community raising, all kinds of things that if you just make the ask, you've got that network around you who are excited about your business.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity to segue into so what are some of the significant trends and changes that you're observing? I think we're talking about that right now. But I mean, in general, what are some of the changes that you've observed over the years that has helped DealMaker adapt to continue to stay, competitive? Because I'm sure that there's probably competition in the market.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the space is exploding and folks have a lot of different options to consider when they think about raising from a community and building that community engagement around them. The thing I love most about building tech is you put it out into the world and you never know how people are going to use it. You think you can think of all the different ways to build out a feature, and then you give it to your users and they use it in a totally different way you never anticipated. And so having been in the space for a very long time now, we've seen that evolution happen through a lot of our different functionality in our tech. And perks are a great example of that. So even just a year ago, putting perks on an offering was a pretty basic and not common thing to do. And then we saw some issuers doing it, and then we built out that functionality so people could play with the different perks, and then we A/B tested that. And now the formulas for different perks that we see on different offerings are really unique, and they're driving huge conversion on these offerings. But that's a sophistication in the space that didn't even exist a year ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing. And I know that just from my experience and conversations with you, DealMaker is 100%, and again, you guys are very forward thinking in the way you think about your network and your technology and how you're continuing to innovate. So I can speak from just experience of working with you, that's definitely something that's helped to contribute to your success. But going back to kind of crowdfunding in general, right? So as a founder, you talk about being founder friendly. I do think it does help. I know you talked about the term sheet, but is there any other avenues out there as founders that you think that make crowdfunding more founder friendly than, say, venture capital or private equity?
I mean, you can set your own terms and valuation, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of times when people are going out and pitching, they don't realize when they're comparing, right, brokered financing, VC, or community. Generally, with a community round, you're going to invest some time into setting up your online store, whether it's with a portal or with a self-hosted raise, and you're going to drive some level of traffic back. You can invest a ton of time in setting up a data room, building out a financial model, showing it all to the VCs. And unless you score something, and only 26% of American companies are VC backed. So unless you're of that 26%, you're going to end up with nothing. You're going to have no other path. The same thing happens with brokered financing rounds. I've seen it my whole career all the time. So not to say that those two avenues aren't phenomenal for the people that can get funded. I think as an entrepreneur, you need to be realistic about how to fund your business. And every CFO needs to be aware of the options that are available and has a responsibility to make sure that their business is pursuing all the options necessary to create shareholder value.
And one of the things I'll share with you just from having conversations with organizations that have worked with you, one of the things that they've shared with me personally that they absolutely love about this, especially from a founder-friendly perspective, they do love the fact that they can set the terms, right? And they do love the fact that they're really, they feel like they're in control of how they're going to raise their money, right? And a couple of the organizations that I've spoke with and the CEOs that I've spoken with, they really love the fact that it's not just raising capital, but it's really raising a community. And they talk about that, right? They're like, hey, look, we can use this community for future rollouts or for future enhancements or for basically a built-in customer database, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of metrics, and I'm part of a lot of conversations about what's happening in the capital raising ecosystem. But you look at some areas of the ecosystem where there's actually such a lack of access to capital that the term sheets that get negotiated are so egregious to founders. And a lot of time, founders don't even know that, because you're talking about multi-level liquidity prefs or things that founders may not totally understand. And I remember talking to one law firm who represents venture capital typically most of the time. And they were talking about a successful exit by a really successful technology company. And the founder was going to walk away with about $5 million. And that to me is nothing, right? You've got years of blood, sweat, and tears this person's given their life for. And the law firm actually thought that that was okay. They said, well, the VC is the one that put up the cash, so they're the ones taking all of risks. So that's about right. And to me, that's not right. And you've got situations where there's a lack of access to capital that's so much that founders really are selling out earlier than they could be. They could be building a unicorn, but they don't own enough of the company. So there's all kinds of systemic problems that people are starting to recognize. And community raising can form, maybe it doesn't have to be the only way. It could be alongside of a round, but a smart founder knows their options and they can use it to leverage what's the best deal for them and the existing shareholders.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I could tell you story after story where you're exactly right. I mean, from a dilutive standpoint, founders dilute way too early and they just can never get to that unicorn status because there's just no incentive for that founder at a certain point, right, to continue to keep going forward. And so I think this is really exciting about, from a crowdfunding perspective, and really being able to allow founders to have access to their own investor pool. And I keep going back to that because I think that's, to me, one of the most exciting things, right? You have access to your community, which is really a diverse investor pool. It allows founders to raise capital from all of these investors, but essentially, to your point, that White Castle story, I mean, that would not have happened. And I shouldn't say that, right? Because typically, from a venture side, they want to make these introductions and their strategy and things like that. But I think there's something to be said about having these community investors that are really they're in it to see you in it.
Yeah. And you may have a business. They are. And you may have a business model that appeals to a community, but doesn't appeal to an institutional investor. And that's okay too, right? Retail businesses, clothing businesses are not SaaS recurring revenue, but there's a whole industry there that's very successful. But that may be not what VCs are looking for. And that's totally fine. So, the reason Congress came up with the Jobs Act and created these rules was so that everyday Americans could invest in the businesses they wanted and they believed in. One interesting trend we're really seeing is on the West Coast, in San Francisco and around Silicon Valley, people really setting up community rounds as a part of their raise. And so using institutional financing, but using a community saying, okay, I'm going to raise 10 million. I'm going to reserve 4 of that for the community around this business. And the rest is going to come from institutions. We saw that a long time ago in the cannabis sector as well. And so different founders where they see the benefit of how they can leverage the community and want to create that 54% engagement are really setting aside that capital. Probably the most high profile one we saw this year was Substack doing that.
Interesting, right? So I've heard about this, right? So essentially hybrid financing models, right? So startups are combining crowdfunding with other forms of financing, such as venture or angel, to bring that hybrid approach to allow them to have diverse sources of capital for different uses, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got folks like Mercury Bank, right? Up and coming digital bank who use that strategy to said, how can we catch up to our competitors? There's a lot of digital banks out there. How can we differentiate and be different and win more market share?
Unbelievable. So I think that's a really interesting story. So let me just kind of ask you this question without talking about specific companies by name. I know you talked about some of the success and some of the experiences with, Flippy and Miso Robotics, but what are some of the other past clients that have used your technology that have achieved great success, or companies that have been committed for the entire time period, how long does it take, and how long does it take for people to actually trust the process, and just some of the success stories that you've had, and what's the time frame look like for some of these things?
Yeah, so probably the most high profile one that I love is the Green Bay Packers, right? You've got a sports team there
Yeah.
who is owned by the fans and built by the fans. And when they wanted to build a new stadium last year, they reached out and set up an online offering and raised $65 million to do that. Now, what a lot of people don't look at is what are the most valuable brands in the NFL? The Green Bay Packers. There's a reason for that, right? There's a reason you've got soccer, or, not to make any enemies, maybe call it football, over in Europe, where those leagues are rabid fan bases and devoted and passionate. But there's over 6 teams in those leagues that are owned by their fans as well. There's an entire German soccer league that is required to be fan funded. And so there are different sports teams that have constantly been leveraging the online communities and fan base. I think that's part of what made e-gaming and esports so popular, is because all of these tactics were being leveraged. And now we're seeing the same thing from more of the bricks and mortar sports leagues as they want to look at how to accelerate their own path to growth. So lots of exciting names there in the sports and film industries that will continue to blow up this space.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be Digital Data Cafe if we didn't dive into one of my favorite subjects, which is data, right? And as a founder, so let's say, for example, I want to do the equity crowdfunding. I would like to work with DealMaker. How do you see startups increasingly using data or data analytics or consumer behaviors tied to marketing or marketing automation to optimize their crowdfunding campaign? Have you seen that? And is that something that you think is going to be a part of crowdfunding in the future?
Definitely. That's the direction this is all going. And in a lot of that sophisticated use of data is driven by the marketing partners who are doing this on a regular basis. And so they have a very defined formula in terms of how to use the data. And that is allowing bigger and bigger raises in the space. So at DealMaker, we're really committed to evolving and continuing to develop our data offering to give people more transparent access to their funnel so that they can focus on conversion metrics. Because when you're doing digital ad spend, every dollar that you can convert better is a huge increase in the return on your ad spend that you're deploying on a daily basis on these campaigns. So data is a huge part of the future. And coupled with that is artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence and the generative tools that DealMaker is building into the platform can make leveraging that data easier and even more accessible.
Yeah. Coming from my background and my experience, where I see the opportunity really having an amazing intersection from the media and the marketing standpoint tied to the data. And I really truly believe that, for founders and crowdfunding, utilizing your platform, your technology, and leveraging data, right, is going to be critical. Because just even from being able to analyze your audiences, right, to analyze the data to understand your audience better, use that to understand past campaign performance versus future campaign performance. Taking that to even use it for market research or, campaign performance of emails, and then A/B testing. And what I love about what you said about the generative AI, I believe that there's a world where it's, hey, listen, understanding the investors that are going to actually make that transaction happening, and then being able to tie it back to be able to experiment with different type of ads and fundraising approaches, messaging, call to actions, and being able to A/B test audiences against creative can really help determine which strategies are going to lead to higher conversion rates and better fundraising results at the end of the day.
100%. So
that's really exciting for you. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
To put it into a real life example, if the last thing you, Albert, bought online yesterday over the weekend, maybe the holidays are coming up, maybe you bought a friend a pair of gloves, you've now left a digital footprint as a glove buyer online. That's the world we live in today. But the next ad that you will see is to invest in a fashion brand company or a clothing company that makes gloves, or someone that's disrupting the glove industry. And that's an investment opportunity that's going to appeal to you because you understand the utility of that product. And so that's already what our marketing partners are doing for issuers on DealMaker's system. And the future world is that everybody's going to have that opportunity, and more founders will realize that they can create a group of champions for their glove company and come to market faster. And those are the founders that'll win.
That's incredible. So quick question for you right before we have our last one. So if those out there listening, if there's founders out there and they want to raise capital and they want to get involved, are there certain business types that you think perform better? Can you offer any advice or insights for these aspiring entrepreneurs? And any thoughts in terms of like ways for them to succeed with your platform?
Yeah, I think, the marketing partners have a really good vision on what types of offerings they can take to market and they can create a digital story out of. But just generally, it's something that, think of it as something that will display well in a TikTok ad, right? A super quick elevator pitch. Maybe it has a big total addressable market. Maybe it's easy to make a video out of it. But that being said, that's not everything, because we have lots of partners who specialize in real estate offerings, dividend generation. They know where the communities are for those kind of dividend generating real estate plays. We've had lots of folks successful in that space as well. So reach out to us, dealmaker.tech, info@dealmaker.tech. And if you have a deck, you can send it in, consult with one of our reps and see if there's something there that's right for you for this kind of capital raising.
Rebecca, this is great. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to meet with you, and best of luck and success. And for the founders out there listening, it's dealmaker.tech. Check out Rebecca and her company. She's doing great things and can help you get some capital in the door. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.